They laughed at him for something so small, something most people don't even think twice about. No phone. No messages. No notifications. Just silence. But what no one realized is that silence was building something powerful. Something they would never forget. Stay with me, because this isn't just a story about being ignored. It's about what happens when the world underestimates the wrong person. Before this story starts, have you ever felt invisible? Stay with me, this might hit closer than you think. The classroom buzzed with the soft glow of screens and the constant tapping of fingers, like a quiet storm of notifications that never stopped. Laughter came in short bursts, inside jokes shared through messages, memes passed around without a word spoken out loud. And in the middle of all that noise, there was Ethan. Sitting still. Silent. His hands resting on an old, slightly torn notebook, its pages filled with careful handwriting instead of apps and icons. He looked up sometimes, just for a second, watching the others lean closer together, their faces lit by their phones, their smiles easy and automatic. Then he'd look back down again, pretending he had something important to read, something that made him just as busy as they were. But the truth was, he was trying not to feel invisible. Because in that room, if you weren't connected, you didn't exist. It wasn't that Ethan didn't notice the phones, or the way they seemed to open doors he couldn't walk through. He noticed everything. The quick smiles when someone received a message, the sudden plans made in seconds, the way names were called out, everyone included except his. And every time it happened, it felt like a small sting, quiet but constant. At home, things were different. The small apartment carried the smell of simple meals and the sound of his mother's tired footsteps after long shifts. She would drop her bag by the door, force a gentle smile, and ask him how his day was. Ethan always said, it was fine. He never mentioned the laughter, the silence around him, or how heavy it felt to be left out. He knew the truth. Money was tight. Bills came first. Food came first. A phone? That was something extra, something they couldn't reach right now. And even though he understood, even though he told himself it didn't matter, there were moments, late at night, staring at the ceiling, when he felt a quiet mix of sadness and frustration. Not because he wanted to be like everyone else, but because he just wanted to belong. At school, the distance between Ethan and the others kept growing, but not in loud, obvious ways. It was subtle, quiet, like a door slowly closing without anyone noticing. Conversations started without him and ended without him. Group work became something he watched instead of joined. Even when he sat right there, it was as if he wasn't part of the picture. During lunch, the cafeteria filled with noise, chairs scraping, trays clattering, voices overlapping. Ethan would sit at the edge of a table, picking at his food while the others leaned in together, laughing at something on a screen. Sometimes, he tried to smile, as if he understood the joke. But deep down, he felt the sting of not knowing, and not being invited to know. There were moments when he almost spoke up, almost asked, "Hey, what are you guys laughing about?" But the words would stop halfway. Fear held them back, the fear of being ignored again, or worse, laughed at. So instead, he stayed quiet, his fingers tracing the edges of his notebook, grounding himself in something that was his. And little by little, that silence started to feel heavier. Not just around him, but inside him too. If you've ever been judged for what you don't have, drop a comment. You're not alone. One afternoon, the teacher assigned a group project. The room instantly came alive. Chairs moved, voices called out names, and small groups formed almost automatically. Ethan stayed seated for a second too long, watching as everyone found their place. His heart started to beat faster. He knew this moment, and how it usually ended. Finally, he stood up, holding his notebook close to his chest like it could protect him. He walked toward a group that still had space, at least physically. "Can I join?" he asked, his voice low but steady. There was a brief silence. One of the boys looked at him, then at the others, and smirked. "How are we supposed to work with someone who doesn't even have a phone?" he said, not even trying to lower his voice. A few quiet laughs followed. Not loud, not explosive, but enough. Enough to burn. Ethan forced a small smile, the kind people use when they don't know what else to do. "I can write. I can help," he added quickly, but his words felt weak, like they disappeared before reaching anyone. "No, it's fine," another student said, already turning back to the group. "We've got it." And just like that, the decision was made for him. Ethan stepped back slowly, his face warm, his chest tight. The classroom noise came rushing back, louder than before, but now it felt distant, like he was underwater. He returned to his seat, sat down, and opened his notebook, not because he had something to do, but because he needed somewhere to look. At that moment, it wasn't just about not having a phone anymore. It was the feeling of not being enough. And that feeling stayed with him long after the bell rang. That night, Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, the dim light from a small lamp casting soft shadows across the room. The silence felt heavier than usual. He replayed the moment in his mind, the laughter, the words, the way they looked at him. His hands tightened slightly, a quiet mix of shame and anger building inside his chest. For a brief moment, he thought about asking his mother for a phone. Maybe if he explained, maybe if he insisted. But then he pictured her tired face, the way she rubbed her eyes after long shifts, the quiet sighs she tried to hide. And just like that, the thought disappeared. He couldn't add more weight to her shoulders. Instead, he looked down at his notebook, the same one he carried everywhere. Slowly, he opened it. The pages were filled with neat lines, small ideas, unfinished thoughts. He grabbed a pen and paused for a second, his heart still heavy, but something inside him shifted. "If they won't hear me," he whispered under his breath, "I'll find another way." And then he started writing. Not for school. Not for anyone else. Just for himself. At first, the words came slowly, awkward, uncertain. But then they began to flow. He wrote about the classroom, the silence, the feeling of being invisible. He wrote about the laughter that echoed longer than it should. He wrote about the things he wished he could say out loud, but never did. Each sentence felt like releasing something he had been holding in for too long. The anger softened. The shame lost its grip. And in its place, something new began to grow. It was small, quiet, but it was there. For the first time, Ethan didn't feel completely powerless. The days began to change, but not in a loud, noticeable way. While the classroom still buzzed with notifications and quiet laughter, Ethan's world started to shift inward. Every afternoon he returned home, sat at the same small table, and opened his notebook like it was a door to somewhere better. The scratching sound of his pen became familiar, almost comforting. Outside, distant traffic hummed, and sometimes the wind brushed softly against the window. Inside, Ethan built something no one else could see. Sentence by sentence, he turned his feelings into stories, real, raw, honest. At school, the silence around him didn't disappear. The same groups formed, the same jokes passed by him. But now, instead of shrinking under it, he observed. He noticed how people spoke, how they laughed, how quickly they judged. He paid attention to the small things, the hesitation in someone's voice, the way a smile could hide insecurity. It was like he was learning a language others didn't even realize they were speaking. Sometimes, the old feelings came back, embarrassment, anger, that quiet question, why me? But now, instead of letting those feelings drown him, he captured them. He wrote them down, shaped them, gave the meaning. And slowly, something inside him began to grow stronger. Not louder. Not visible yet. But deeper. Ethan was no longer just enduring his reality. He was understanding it. One afternoon, as the final bell rang and students rushed out in their usual hurry, Ethan stayed behind, carefully placing his notebook into his bag. He moved slower than the others, as if there was no real reason to rush, no messages waiting, no plans to catch up with. Just another quiet walk home. "Ethan, can you stay for a moment?" The voice stopped him mid-step. It was Mrs. Carter. He turned, a bit surprised, his heart tightening slightly. "Did I do something wrong?" he wondered. Slowly, he walked toward her desk, his hands instinctively gripping the strap of his bag. "I've been noticing you," she said gently, her tone calm but attentive. "Not the kind of attention that judges, but the kind that sees. You're always writing." Ethan hesitated, his eyes dropping for a second. "It's nothing, just notes," he replied quietly, almost brushing it off. Mrs. Carter gave a small, knowing smile. "May I take a look?" For a moment, everything inside him froze. His notebook wasn't just paper, it was where he kept everything he couldn't say out loud. His fears, his anger, his thoughts, his truth. Letting someone read it felt like opening a door he wasn't sure he was ready to open. But something in her voice, steady, patient, made him pause. Slowly, he reached into his bag and pulled the notebook out. His fingers lingered on it for a second before handing it over, as if letting go of a part of himself. Mrs. Carter didn't rush. She flipped through the pages carefully, her expression changing little by little. The classroom grew quiet, the distant noise of students fading into the background. Ethan stood there, his chest tight, his mind racing. What if she thinks it's bad? What if it's not enough? But then she looked up at him, and her eyes were different. Softer. Impressed. "Ethan," she said, her voice low but certain, "this isn't nothing." For the first time in a long time, someone wasn't overlooking him. They were truly seeing him. Pause for a second. Would you have ignored him too? Be honest. Ethan stood there, unsure of what to do with the silence that followed. His heart was still racing, but now it wasn't just fear, it was something unfamiliar, a quiet spark of hope. Mrs. Carter closed the notebook gently, almost carefully, as if what was inside mattered. "You have a voice," she said, looking directly at him. "And it's honest. That's rare." Ethan didn't know how to respond. No one had ever said something like that to him before. He shifted slightly, his fingers brushing against his sleeve, his mind searching for words that wouldn't come. "It's just things I think about," he murmured. "And those thoughts matter," she replied, her tone firm but kind. "More than you realize." She paused for a moment, then continued, "There's a storytelling contest coming up. I think you should enter." The words hit him instantly. A contest? In front of people? His chest tightened again, but this time, it was different. Fear mixed with doubt. He immediately pictured the classroom, the same faces that had laughed, the same voices that had ignored him. "I don't think," he started, shaking his head slightly. "That's not really for me." Mrs. Carter didn't interrupt. She simply waited, letting him speak, letting him feel. "You don't have to decide right now," she said calmly. "But I want you to think about it. Sometimes the thing that scares us the most is the thing that can change everything." Ethan looked at his notebook in her hands, then back at her. For the first time, the idea didn't feel impossible, just difficult. And as he walked out of the classroom that day, the world didn't feel completely the same anymore. Because now, there was a question in his mind that hadn't been there before. What if I actually try? That question followed Ethan all the way home. It echoed in his mind with every step, mixing with the familiar doubts he had carried for so long. What if I try and fail? What if they laugh again? That night, he sat at the table with his notebook open, but for the first time, the blank page felt heavier than usual. The pen rested between his fingers, unmoving. His thoughts were louder now, fear, insecurity, memories of every moment he had been ignored. But then, slowly, another voice pushed through. Quieter, but stronger. What if this is your chance? He took a deep breath and began. At first, the words didn't come easily. He crossed out sentences, rewrote lines, paused for long moments staring at the page. Frustration crept in, his jaw tightening, his hand pressing harder against the paper. It would have been easier to stop, to close the notebook and forget the idea completely. But he didn't. Instead, he kept going. Line by line. Thought by thought. He didn't try to impress anyone. He just told the truth. About the silence. The laughter. The feeling of being invisible in a room full of people. Days passed, and his routine changed. While others spent time on their phones, Ethan spent hours refining his story. Sometimes late into the night, the only sound in the room was the quiet scratch of his pen and the occasional sigh when something didn't feel right. There were moments he doubted everything. Moments he almost gave up. But each time he remembered Mrs. Carter's words, and something inside him refused to let go. This wasn't just about a contest anymore. This was about being heard, for the first time in his life. As the contest approached, the weight of Ethan's decision became more real with each passing day. It wasn't just an idea anymore, it was happening. His name was on the list. There was no turning back now. At school, nothing had really changed on the surface. The same students laughed, the same groups stayed together, and Ethan was still Ethan. But inside him, something was different. There was a quiet tension, a mix of fear and determination that followed him everywhere. Sometimes, during class, he would imagine himself on that stage. The lights. The silence. All those eyes looking at him. His chest would tighten instantly, his hands growing cold. What if I freeze? What if no one cares? Those thoughts didn't go away. But now, instead of running from them, he faced them. Every afternoon, he practiced. At first, just whispering the words under his breath, barely audible. Then a little louder. Then standing up, trying to feel what it would be like. His voice would shake, his heart would race, but he kept going. Again. And again. There were nights he stopped halfway through, frustrated, his eyes closing as doubt crept in. You're not ready. You're not like them. But then he would remember every moment he had been ignored. Every laugh. Every time he felt invisible. And slowly, his expression would change. His grip would tighten. No. I am doing this, he whispered to himself. And each time he practiced, something shifted. Not perfectly. Not all at once. But enough. Enough for him to stand a little straighter. Enough for his voice to last a little longer. Enough for fear to lose just a bit of its power. The day of the contest arrived faster than Ethan expected. The school auditorium felt different from the moment he stepped inside. Bigger, colder, heavier. Rows of chairs filled the space, and the low murmur of voices echoed against the walls. Students gathered in small groups, some laughing, some rehearsing quietly, others scrolling through their phones one last time. Ethan stood near the back, his notebook held tightly in his hands. His fingers pressed against the edges, slightly trembling. His heart beat fast, too fast. He could feel it in his chest, in his throat, even in his ears. Then he looked around, and recognized faces. The same ones. The ones who had laughed. The ones who had ignored him. The ones who once made him feel like he didn't belong. A wave of doubt hit him hard. His mind whispered, "You don't belong here either." For a brief second, he considered walking away. No one would stop him. No one would even notice. He could just leave, go back to being invisible, safe in the background. But then, he tightened his grip on the notebook. He remembered the nights he stayed up writing. The frustration. The fear. The quiet decision he made not to give up. He took a slow, deep breath. I didn't come this far to turn back now. When his name was called, the sound seemed louder than everything else. It echoed through the room, cutting through the noise. Ethan froze for half a second. Then slowly, he stepped forward. One step. Then another. The stage lights felt warm against his face as he walked up. The room fell quieter, not completely silent, but enough for him to feel every single pair of eyes on him. His hands were still shaking. His chest was tight. The fear was still there. But this time, he didn't run from it. If this story is touching you, share it with someone who needs to hear this today. For a moment, Ethan just stood there. The stage lights blurred his vision slightly, and the silence in the room felt louder than any noise he had ever heard. He could feel his heartbeat in his fingertips, his breath uneven, his thoughts racing. He looked down at his notebook, then slowly up at the audience. Faces. So many faces. Some curious, some distracted, and some familiar. His throat tightened. But then, something shifted. He remembered why he was there. Not for them. Not to impress. Not to prove he was better. But to finally be heard. He took a deep breath. And began. At first, his voice was soft, almost fragile. But it carried. The microphone caught every word, every pause, every emotion he had poured into those pages. He spoke about silence. About being surrounded by people, yet feeling completely alone. About laughter that wasn't shared with you, but directed at you. The room began to change. The whispers faded. The shifting in chairs slowed. Phones lowered, one by one. People started listening. Really listening. As Ethan continued, his voice grew steadier. Stronger. Not loud, but certain. Each word felt real, like it came from somewhere deep, somewhere honest. You could hear the vergonha, the quiet Rabia, the fear he carried for so long, but also the hope, the courage that had slowly taken its place. Some students looked at him differently now. Their expressions softened. A few glanced at each other, uncomfortable, recognizing parts of the story they couldn't ignore anymore. And in that moment, Ethan wasn't invisible. He wasn't the boy without a phone. He was the one everyone was watching. The one everyone was finally hearing. When Ethan finished his last sentence, his voice didn't echo, it settled. It hung in the air for a brief, powerful moment, like the room itself needed time to breathe again. And then, silence. Not the kind he was used to. Not the empty, ignoring silence that once made him feel small. This silence was different. It was full. Heavy. Honest. Ethan stood still, his chest rising and falling, his hands no longer trembling the same way. He looked out at the audience again, and what he saw caught him off guard. Some students had their heads slightly lowered. Others avoided eye contact. A few looked directly at him, but their expressions had changed. There was no laughter now. No smirks. Just something quieter. Something closer to regret. One of the boys, the same one who had laughed during the group project, shifted in his seat, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the floor. That moment, that sentence he once threw out so easily, now seemed heavier than he ever imagined. Then slowly, someone started clapping. A single sound. Sharp in the quiet room. Another followed. Then another. And suddenly, the entire auditorium filled with applause. Not forced. Not polite. Real. Strong. Ethan blinked, almost unsure if it was happening. His throat tightened again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was something deeper. Relief. Validation. A quiet release of everything he had been holding in for so long. He didn't smile widely. He didn't celebrate. He just stood there for a second, taking it in. Because for the first time, they weren't laughing at him. They were standing for him. After the applause slowly faded, Ethan stepped down from the stage, his legs still slightly unsteady, but not from fear anymore. It was something else. Something lighter. As he walked back through the rows of chairs, the same space that once felt overwhelming now felt different. People looked at him. Really looked. Not through him, not past him. At him. A few students shifted awkwardly as he passed, their earlier confidence replaced with quiet discomfort. One girl gave him a small, sincere nod. Another whispered, "That was really good," almost as if she wasn't sure she had the right to say it. Then, something unexpected happened. "Hey, Ethan." He stopped. Slowly, he turned around. It was the same boy from before, the one who had laughed, the one who had questioned his worth so easily. But now, his posture was different. His voice wasn't sharp anymore. It hesitated. He started, then paused, rubbing the back of his neck. "I didn't know. I didn't think." He struggled to find the words, his eyes briefly dropping to the floor. That confidence from before was gone, replaced by something unfamiliar, regret. "I'm sorry," he finally said. Simple. Quiet. Real. Ethan looked at him for a moment. There was no anger in his expression. No need to prove anything. Just a calm understanding. "It's okay," he replied softly. And he meant it. Because this wasn't about getting even. It wasn't about making anyone feel small. It was about growth. For both of them. As Ethan walked away, he didn't feel like the same person who had once sat alone, trying to disappear. He didn't need validation anymore, but he had earned respect. And more importantly, he had found his voice. In the weeks that followed, things didn't magically become perfect, but they changed in ways that mattered. The classroom still had the same desks, the same noise, the same glowing screens, but Ethan was no longer invisible inside it. Now when he walked in, a few heads turned, not out of judgment, but recognition. Some students greeted him. Others asked about his story. Not everyone suddenly became his friend, and that was okay. Because for the first time, Ethan didn't measure his worth by how many people included him. He had already found something more important. At home, his mother noticed the difference before he even said a word. The way he carried himself, the quiet confidence in his voice, the small but genuine smile that appeared more often. One evening, as he sat writing again, she paused by the doorway and simply watched, her eyes soft with pride. She didn't fully know what had changed, but she knew something had. And Ethan kept writing. Not for approval. Not to prove anything. But because it had become part of who he was. His words grew stronger, deeper, reaching beyond the walls of that classroom. What started as a way to survive became a way to connect. Years later, his stories would reach people he had never met, people who felt the same silence he once felt. And through his words, they would realize they weren't alone. Because sometimes, the thing that makes you feel left out is the very thing that builds your strength. So before you judge someone for what they don't have, remember this. You might be overlooking the very thing that makes them extraordinary. In the end, Ethan didn't need a phone to be heard. He needed courage. While others were busy looking down at their screens, he was looking within, and that made all the difference. The same people who once ignored him became the ones who listened the most. Not because he changed who he was, but because he finally showed them who he had always been. So before you judge someone for what they don't have, remember this: sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one with the strongest voice. If this story meant something to you, don't forget to like and subscribe, because stories like this can change the way we see people.